Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dojo podcast, Living Beyond the Edge. I am your guest host, Devon Brazil, and I am so thrilled and honored to be here with one of my very best friends and soul sisters, Lisasia Wild, who I have the opportunity to interview. The format of this podcast is incredible. The way Zahara set it up, in the sense that she will be doing some solo episodes, and then she'll be interviewing women from the dojo ecosystem. And then we have an opportunity to feel into someone who inspires us from our own communities outside of the dojo to bring in and introduce to you all. So the second I knew that I would have this beautiful chance, I instantly thought of Lisasia. Lisasia Wild is a woman that I admire deeply and completely in my life. She walks such a path of integrity in the work that she does. She's a funeral celebrant, a grief advocate, and a multi-passionate and talented artist of many different disciplines. She's a poet. She's a photographer. She is a ceremonialist, unlike any other. So I can't wait to share more about her with you. And if you haven't yet tuned into my episode with Zahara, I would love for you to take the opportunity to listen to that, either after this one or before, just to get a little bit of context about the conversations that we'll be moving into. So before we begin, I would like to start off the episode. We like to start off talking about our greatest whys in life, and that becomes the foundation for our conversation. So before Lisasia dives into her why, I'd like to share a little bit more about mine if you didn't tune into the episode. And if you did, let me just amplify it even more in this moment. So my highest and brightest why in this lifetime is absolutely to ignite and amplify real magic in this physical world reality. Not like the magic with pulling the rabbit out of the hat. Some adults have forgotten what real magic actually means. So my mission and my work as a transformational coach and a steward of a community space with my husband, Isaac, here at the Real Magic House, is to reintroduce people to the beauty and the numinosity that comes from connection and collaboration and creativity through transformational, heart-bursting experiences, workshops, performances, art galleries, retreats, and sessions with ourselves and also with other experts, with heart-centered entrepreneurs, with healers, with creatives from many different walks of life that will come together in collaboration to create containers that bring people back home to who they really are. So that is my why that I am walking with in this lifetime. And Lisasia, now I would love to ask you, what is your greatest why in this lifetime?
Well, first, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. And thank you for having me. And also thank you for seeing me.
Oh, yeah.
I think that I feel this deep longing to experience the grandest sense of sovereignty and freedom that's humanly possible in this life that I get to live right now. And I think that sometimes in order to understand a thing completely, we're called to understand what it isn't. And since I came into this body, into this human life, with the purpose for understanding complete sovereignty and freedom, the training necessary for that assignment, I think, was having an experience in childhood that was full of lots of tumultuousness, things that felt like probably the complete opposite of what freedom and sovereignty feels like. And for me, that meant experiencing traumas. It meant watching other people experience traumas and really just understanding, because I was always watching what was going on around me. It became really clear to me the ways that we're all so intimately connected with each other. because I saw what kind of fracture happened when the people around me were experiencing trauma and didn't have the resources available to reintegrate after that, the way that it rippled out and touched the people around them. And I think most of my 20s were about realizing that it's not the actual trauma that takes place that that creates this level of harm. It's not having the ability to reintegrate afterwards. It's not having the resources necessary to find safety in your body
Yeah.
after the event happens. And so I started asking a lot of questions about what are those resources that are necessary to reintegrate after an experience like that. I started asking questions about how many of those resources can I find from inside my own body? How many of those resources can I find within my community? What does it take for a community to sustain those resources? And what does it look like to be a space holder for showing other people what those resources can look like? For letting people know that it is possible to reconnect to yourself in safety and sovereignty in order to integrate. And I think something that I also came to understand is that anyone who experiences some part of their soul leaving their body is experiencing death, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a complete death. We've completed the cycle, and sometimes that's trauma happening, and then pieces of us going away. But understanding that it's always possible to call those pieces back into ourselves. And it's actually a really beautiful opportunity that happens when we get to this point where we're experiencing a massive grief.
Yeah.
That happens when loss happens, right? The grief can feel so incredibly big,
Yeah.
and so hard to hold. And eventually we end up getting to this point where we realize we don't really have any option except for to surrender to the grief.
Yeah.
And since it is impossible to hold it, it's not something that we could just get to contain in our bodies. When we do the surrendering, it tears us open a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we have some cracks, and our soft bits are exposed to the world, and we're completely vulnerable. It's like being a little baby, and just trusting that the people around you can hold you and keep you safe and protect you from all the sharp edges of the world. But what happens in those spaces is whatever medicine comes and finds you, whether it's support from other people or some message that comes in the form of a poem, or even just like the wind on your face. When it comes and it lands and it finds its way through those little cracks, it gets to land on those soft parts and become a part of who you are with no resistance, because you've already done the impossible work.
Because you're cracked open, you're surrendered. It has that deep access to you finally. Then we put down our armor because we have to, right? That's powerful.
Yeah. And then since it's a part of who you are, it's now a part of your walk.
Yeah.
It's not something that you have to look up in a book to remember, have someone remind you of, or recall intellectually. It's so much a part of who you are
Yeah.
because you were so cracked open when you received it.
Mm.
And that is so profoundly beautiful to me. And what it says to me is that when it comes to death and grief, and working with families who have experienced grief, there's such a huge opportunity for coming in with these resources that I've collected in my medicine bag through my own story, to hold space for families
Yeah.
who are in this really cracked open space. And I really, really, really have this belief that um, that in doing that, we're learning how to get in right relationship with ourselves and communities,
Yeah.
and forming a healthier process, relationship through these processes with death, is going to change the way that we relate to each other.
Yes, I want everybody listening to really catch what Lisasia is saying here, because I think a lot of times, especially when we're feeling called to go onto the healing path in some way, to be a coach or a facilitator or a space holder of any shape or form, we've gotten this really toxic messaging that the healer needs to be healed, in a sense of like, we are not able to come forward and be the leaders that we feel called to be until we heal these cracked spaces that Lisasia is talking about, these wounds that we received. I mean, Lisasia is a magnificent space holder and leader in this area. And what she's speaking into is that she has gone through the initiations and the curriculum in life around trauma and loss in order to become the funeral celebrant and the grief advocate that she is. And the work is never complete, is it? Like, it's not like someday we're going to wake up and finally have done the work, done the workshops, done the meditations, done the plant medicine ceremonies, whatever it is, and finally be healed enough to rise into our why, to rise into our mission. In fact, what I think you're saying and what I'm hearing is that you collect these tools in your medicine bag, these resources, and that from this cracked open place, this soft place where life has really touched you, you can then speak to that because it's your lived experience. It's not just something you got a degree or a certification around. You are walking your walk. And now the tools that you've gathered on that journey have really prepared you from a lived place, from a place of integrity, from the place of life chewing you out or chewing you up and swallowing you whole and spitting you back out again. From that space, you can really become the mission-driven leader that you're meant to be. And it isn't really about getting over it or healing it. It's about going through it and allowing yourself to be broken down and broken open enough to really be touched on that deep level by life and be able to actually sit with people the way that you do in the darkness and the depths of their grief, which, by the way, is a really challenging place to be with people, isn't it? Because a lot of us, when we get in there, we either shy away from it and shut down, or we want to fix it. We want to fix and caretake and gloss over it and find the silver lining. But what I find with you in the work that you do and, in the fuel of your why and the way that you've shown up for me is that you actually have this really incredible gift because of the journey that you've walked to just sit in the darkness with love and with presence and holding people there in those spaces and being with them in their cracks and their monsters and their darkness without turning away. And I think that that's a rare gift that you possess. And I thank you for bringing that forward in the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. I really love everything you just said, especially the part about being on a continuous journey to healing. And it's just the real truth that a lot of healers who are holding space for other people are hungry for healing. Where I mean, we feel like there's no other choice. Want to live it and be it and spread it to the rest of the world. Because if I'm being completely honest, I spend a lot more time in this space of my 10-year-old self thinking that that I'm stuck being attached to this kind of trauma. I mean, for a long time, I thought that my purpose was connected to pain. I thought that the bigger picture was understanding pain cycles, and that was the most of it.
Mhm.
But I'm so incredibly thankful to be surrounded by people who are like you, who remind me to keep asking questions about the why. Because when I dive deeper into the why, it reminds me, okay, so if I'm at 10 years old right now, then I have to keep going backwards, going through, like you said. So if I'm at 10 years old, I'm going to go from 10 to 9 to 8, all the way back through 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to before I even got here, and land on that space where I understand that it's the sovereignty and the freedom and the bliss. That's the purpose.
Well, and that no one and no thing can ever take that away from you. I think that's the work. That's the healing process that we're all on, that growth spiral. You know, we always talk about growth isn't linear. It's a spiral. And, you know, we may on our healing journeys return back to these traumas and these losses and these places of darkness again and again, but hopefully with the willingness to show up for them and do the growth work that we're here to do, we can start to see these experiences that we've gone through at age 10, at age 3 for me, you know, whatever it was, with new eyes, and learn how to be with them. You use the word integration towards the beginning of our conversation, which I love. And I think it's so important, is like, how do we integrate these things? How do we learn to live with them? How do we learn to love from these spaces? How do we learn to lead with these things in our bodies, these wounds, these sacred parts of our stories, rather than feeling like we need to wave a magic wand and fill them with rainbows and light, and all things magical and twinkly? Can we be like, yo, there's like some dark parts about me and my story, and my willingness to be with them and look at them without shying away is my strength. And when I can do that for me, then I can do that for other people. Like, that's the walk that you walk. That's who you be in the world from my perspective. Like, that's how you show up. And I think that it has been a profound example of what it can look like to have a story, with darkness, with depth, with bumps in the road, and still find your strength. It's about acceptance and ownership, and the willingness to dare to look at these things, you know, without turning your face towards the sun every time, because life is shadow and light, and you have had this tremendous ability to become like a shadow dancer and a shadow walker, and someone who can, you know, sing in the shadows and love in the shadows like no one else I've met. So I just want to ask you, like, what is it about your story that has allowed you to be somebody who can sit across from someone in the depths of grief, in the depths of loss, without shying away, and like be that companion for them in that chapter of their journeys?
I think it's because I understand what a relief it is to be able to lean into supportedness when you're in a space like that. Um, when you're in a space where you're lost, and you don't know the way forward, and you're having trouble finding your own inner wisdom, and you're tired, you know, and there's so much to sort through, you just don't know how you're ever going to sort through it. When someone shows up and gives you permission to just melt into it all, and to trust it, and when you can do that, when you can get to that place of melting into it and accepting it, having that faith, and trusting that you're supported through it, knowing that you can trust yourself, that you're going to come out on the other end, that there are always divine helpers to show up and get you through it. When you can do that and you come out on the other end, it's a sense of like, for me, just everything that's sacred about this life and about this walk. That type of feeling held and nourished is it's just so beautiful. And knowing how beautiful it is, and just seeing other people in those spaces where maybe they're doubting themselves, or they don't know what's going to happen, it feels just as amazing. It feels like I'm tapping into that space and that feeling all over again when I can look at them and say, you can do this. You know, not you can do this in the sense that you have to gear up and gladiator your way through this, but you can do this in the sense that you can be supported right now. You can receive the support. You can breathe. You know, you can keep breathing. Like I know that you can keep breathing through this. I know that you have the power to surrender to the process, and come out on the other end just as powerful as you've always been.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned earlier, those wounds and those traumas that we go through in life always involve some sort of a death, right? Because they're big moments of significant change in our lives that require us to die to who we used to be in order to rise into who we're meant to become. And you're trustable in that because you've done it over and over and over again in your life, and you've been on the other side and learned how to surrender into the receivership of allowing people to show up for you and hold you. And what I'm hearing is that you're speaking to how good that's felt for you on your path, and you know, the people who have seen you and heard you and held you, how much of a difference that's made, and it's emboldened you to become that type of companion who can walk with people through that, because you know how good it feels and what a difference it can make. And you've been able to use all of the resources you've gained on both sides of the coin and both sides of the situation to serve in the way that you do. And I think that that's extremely powerful.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I would never look at a person who's going through a process of like maybe perhaps loss of a loved one and say like you can do this, it's going to be beautiful on the other side, like it's all meant to happen, like this is happening for a reason, or any of those things, you know. But since I believe those things to be true, there's no way to sort of like skip to the fluff, you know, there's no way to just like skip to the other side. So, you know, just being that, as you said, I've been through the fire, I have faith in the process, and I have faith in people, and I have faith in the divinity of the process. And so, you know, since I trust that and I trust the person, I'm just showing up with the resources. I'm showing up hopefully to help the person feel safe and supported, first and foremost, as the foundation for being able to lean into all of the, you know, tricky parts of the process. And then, you know, hopefully I'm bringing along some poems and some artwork and whatever it is that the person might also need on their journey.
Yes. So let's talk about that too. I want to let our listeners know that Lisasia and I are both celebrants. And in fact, we both studied at the Celebrant Institute. And I would say that
CF and I.
Yes, we would both highly recommend the process of going through that work. Celebrant is a relatively new term. There still aren't very many of us. We're an emerging profession. It's one of the things of many that we both do in the ways that we serve in life, but essentially what it speaks to is being a ceremonialist, and typically a non-denominational ceremonialist who is more concerned with meeting people where they're at in regards to their beliefs and what feels sacred to them, and supporting individuals and couples and groups in creating ceremonies that truly reflect their personalities, their beliefs, their preferences. And so the work that I do is typically with marrying couples and also healing ceremonies and circles and ceremonies for women going through times of transformation. And Lisasia really dove into the funeral celebrant process, among other things that she is doing. So she is really able to sit with people who have just lost a loved one, especially from her background as a creative, and also support them as a ceremonialist in inventing from their hearts and souls a ceremony that actually reflects the soul of the loved one that they just lost. Instead of going by any rule books or traditions about what that's supposed to look like, she's able to pull in and weave many different traditions and paths and actually create new ones based upon the needs and the visions of the people that she serves. So, Lisasia, with that, I would love to ask you, like, what is the need that you're seeing right now for different types of ceremonies, and how can a celebrant support someone in creating a ceremony that actually reflects their loved one when they're going through a time of loss in their lives?
The need that I'm seeing right now is, I think people are so hungry for meaning.
Yeah.
In any way they can get it. You know, in art, in literature, and connecting with people in all aspects of life. Right now, I think people are really searching for meaning, and in ceremony and end of life ceremonies, it's not any different. It's the reason why we're seeing so much rejection to the old traditions, you know, doing things just because our grandparents are doing it and having no idea, you know, what the connection is to it, and really just, you know, losing someone, and experiencing that grief is already enough to make you want to dissociate from the process. So you're sitting through a ceremony, all these traditions that are just like, you know, making you go cross-eyed and filling your head with stuff that you have no connection to whatsoever. It's just all that much more dissociating.
Yeah.
And so really diving deep into what it is that is calling us to be back in our bodies. What are the things that are going to grab our attention and make it worth it to be centered in our experience?
Yeah.
These are things that should be culturally relevant, you know?
Yeah.
What is most true for us right now? Maybe as a family who's lost someone, or as a community who's lost someone. Yeah, and hanging on to those pieces of art and poetry that make us put our hands on our heart. So yeah, meaning.
I love that. I love that so much. And as someone who has experienced some significant loss in the last couple of years, or the last decade, really, we've lost my dad, and then also in my husband's family, his sister, his grandfather, and his grandmother in the last 7 years, but particularly in the last 3, there's been some significant loss. And after doing this celebrant training, the difference that I feel like I've been able to make in my family is like taking the time to pause and, just like you said, really try to feel into what is the meaning that we want to touch into in these ceremonies and celebrations of life that we're going to have to honor a human life. Like the conversations have really come to, Lisasia, like, why don't we celebrate death in the same way we celebrate birth and marriage? Think about a wedding ceremony. How much time and money and planning goes into celebrating love and that union of two souls who say yes to each other on the next level? why don't we put that much intentionality in the way that we celebrate a human life? Like, my goodness, because it can be so sad and so dissociating for some people. It can cause conflict. I mean, there's so many difficult emotions that may arise when a loved one dies that oftentimes we just try to skirt through it and make it as quickly as possible. Let's find this random church with these random ham sandwiches, with these random passages from the Bible. Like, even if that person wasn't extremely religious, or even if they were, how about that? Like, are there still things that are deeper than that, more personal than that, that we can weave into these moments when we're honoring somebody's life that will actually leave us all feeling like we've got our hands on our hearts and we can feel the rhythm within, and we can find peace knowing that there was something about that person's unique spirit that was truly reflected in the way that we celebrated them.
Yeah, I really like how everything we're talking about is circling back to the why, which is what we started with in the beginning of this conversation, So a lot of the time when we experience anything hard, and especially when we lose someone, the question that we're crying out is like, why? Like, why did this happen?
Why?
Why did this person, have to leave my life? Why am I experiencing this right now? I need to find some way to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, I mean, the greatest philosophers have been trying to answer questions about the mysteries of life and death since the beginning of time. And we're going to have to accept that we're not going to find the overarching why, but we are going to be able to find the why for this moment.
Yes, the why for this moment. And like, can we collectively, as a family and a community that's going through grief and loss, tune into that person's why? Like, what was their why for living? And can we use that as the foundation and the inspiration for the ways in which we celebrate them and remember them in the days to come? Like, what was their impact? What was their legacy? I mean, think about a ceremony that could be created from that space rather than a ceremony that is just kind of rushed through as out of obligation, from a place of total shutdown, and pain. And obviously, like, grief is wow, it can be very all-consuming. And I just want everyone listening to remember that there are partners and guides and sacred friends like Lisasia who you can call upon during times of grief to walk with you, because as a family it can be very disorienting and overwhelming. It is, and absolutely heartbreaking and earth-shattering to lose someone that you really truly love from this physical world reality. But there are people out there like Lisasia, there are celebrants, there are grief advocates, there are spiritual leaders from different traditions and paths who can show up to support you in actually taking this moment to be so intentional around ways to gather as a family. I mean, here at the Real Magic House, we actually hosted our first celebration of life about a month ago, and the family decided they wanted to do a women's circle to heal before they did their celebration of life. And then they had the funeral in a library, actually, because the loved one that they lost absolutely loved books, and that's where she found the magic in her life. So they were at a local library, which is so cool. I mean, if you're listening, have you considered that it might not be a church? It could be a library. It could be in the arms of nature. It could be anywhere. The location it could be at home. How beautiful is it to be in a loved one's home and invite people in for a potluck and cook recipes that the person you lost absolutely adored? Like, there's so many ways now in this time that we're living in where we can actually bring in the unique spirit and flavor of the person who passed and make it actually reflective of their spirit. I think that's what we've been missing, and it's what we're calling in now in this area that we so try, especially in the Western world, to reject and forget about. But we're living in times where we are all forced collectively on the planet to face our mortality in a way that I think human beings have never been forced to face before. So let's be in these conversations with one another and embrace, like you said, I mean, other than being blessed enough to be born, right? Then we know we're going to die. That's the only other guarantee. And every single other thing in between those 2 points is a mystery, right? So let's just like take a breath and like realize that together. And when those moments show up, like, how can we lean into it a bit more? I think calling for help outside of your own immediate circle of family and friends and community is important. Bringing in other people to help hold down and anchor both the intensity and the beauty of what's possible in that moment.
Yeah, I really love what you said about tapping into the why of the person. That's a huge part of my job as a celebrant, is listening to stories from the family and then coming up with what we call a soul spark. Because when we're writing the ceremony, we include a soul spark rather than a eulogy. We weave all the stories together that we get from the family in order to talk about what that person's soul spark was, what their why was. And how beautiful does it feel to wrap up a ceremony whose very purpose is to honor your loved one? What more beautiful way to do that than to share with the world the most beautiful parts of who they were? And there's just no way to wrap that up in some Bible verses.
Yeah.
You know, Bible verses and ham sandwiches don't really do that.
Seriously.
It makes you want to dissociate from the process. It doesn't inspire bravery.
Yes. And that part.
And we really we want the supportedness, and we want the inspiration to be brave enough to face our mortality, to face our story. Because how are we going to be able to understand how completely epic the entire thing was from birth to death without delivering all of that real honor to the death part, which is what we're really craving to do in our spirits, what we really want to do. But it's this belief that we can't sit with it, that we can't hold it, that causes us to want to dissociate. And I'm here to tell you all, there are other ways to do it. There are options. And like Devon was saying, there are space holders and celebrants who can show up and present tools and ideas and ways to navigate something that feels so completely impossible. And also to remind you that there's so much value in receiving the supportedness necessary, the resources necessary to lean into the process and come out on the other end with something sacred.
Absolutely, Lisasia. And there are more ways than ever before to actually honor our lost loved ones, because the traditions and the rule books are breaking down, and there's that room for the freedom and sovereignty that you were speaking to in the beginning to emerge for each and every one of us. And in my opinion, a good death and a good after death absolutely involves freedom and sovereignty. I think back and feel back to the deaths of my father and Isaac's grandfather, and damn, they did it their way. Like they did it their way. Like I have peace in that. Like they died their way. And how can we offer people that good death and the good celebration of their life that honors them doing it their way with freedom and sovereignty without trying to change it? And I think especially in the death process, like when someone's actively dying, it can be really easy to, like, we try to tell my dad, stop smoking. Or we try to tell Isaac's grandpa, stop eating junk food because he just had the biggest sweet tooth. And stop drinking margaritas. But you know what? Like there's a point in which we just surrendered and said, smoke that cigar, drink that margarita, eat that piece of cake. Because you know what? Like this is yours to do your way. And our jobs in this moment are really just to hold you, to sing to you, to pray with you. If we have the ability to share stories with you and jokes with you before, you know, the death process really happens. Like I think a lot of our work right now, as celebrants, but also as people who've experienced loss, or maybe if you're listening, are currently experiencing it, is really to lean into the person and take into account their greater why. And how can I honor them and dignify them in this moment by allowing them their freedom and sovereignty and letting them go out with the bang that they want to go out with,
Mhm.
it can be so hard to do, but the results can be extremely beautiful too.
Absolutely. And I love the phrase that you just used, good death.
Yeah.
I really like that because it seems like a phrase that most people would be like, what are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean? That's not possible. Death is morbid. Just happens to be a part of that rejection to wanting to relate to it.
Yeah.
But as soon as we acknowledge that there can be such a thing as good death, we can start to answer the questions around how do we give that to people? If there's such a thing as good, what is a good death? Well, it includes sovereignty.
Yeah. What would it be
and
to
freedom.
that person?
Yeah.
Because your answer and my answer to that are going to be completely different.
And I mean, even just in all of our, wanting to stay away from it, acknowledging that there can be absolute freedom and sovereignty in death liberates us to connect with it.
Yeah, 100% within death and in the aftermath of death. There can be freedom and sovereignty. And I think that's a huge piece of what you advocate for in your work. I mean, I've looked at your questionnaire that you use when you create ceremonies for people, and it's so much about what would your beloved last one want in this moment? What were their signs and symbols and colors, and what was their music? What was their flavor? What were their interests? Because this is about them. And there's so much in family that's like, well, this is the way that we want their death to go, and this is how we want the ceremony to go because it's what's comfortable for us, and it's what grandma did, and great grandma, and like now we're living in these times where we have this opportunity to expand our perception of what's possible in ushering the process of death and honoring it when it's done.
Absolutely. When I'm interviewing families and they say, Uncle Bob really loved, boating, or whatever it was. As soon as they say this person really loved something, I take that and I run with it and I say, tell me why they loved it so much. Why was it such a big part of this person's story? Why was it so much a part of their joy? And even when they say, oh, like, Carly hated glitter.
Right.
Why? Why do they hate it so much? Like, what is it? Why was it such a sticking point? Like, what was their why? And how can we expand in that and feel all the way into it, feel the meaning in it,
Wow. Yeah, this is big stuff. And I love that we have taken some time to shed light on what's possible here in the realm of, ushering people through this biggest transition that we're all going to go through at some mysterious point on our journeys. So thank you for doing that work. And in this moment, what feels true for me to just ask you, probably as we start to close up here, is like, what are the words that you would speak into to someone who is listening to this, who is either going through the experience of someone they love who is actively dying, perhaps they themselves have just received a diagnosis or on a journey, or if there's someone who's in the aftermath of death, like someone who is very in the world of grief and loss right now? Like, what words of wisdom or any advice or any, love notes could you speak into their hearts from yours right now?
Well, I think a really common pattern of behavior that I see in people who are in any stage of loss, right? Watching a loved one die, or trying to process after someone's died, is that oftentimes this frantic energy can emerge, this desire to hold things together, hold themselves together, hold their family together, to figure out what's the right thing to be doing right now. What's the thing that I should be putting my mind on? And my advice to anyone who's experiencing that would be to slow down, and to really take inventory of the things that resource them.
Yeah.
And if it feels too hard to think about the things that usually resource you in your everyday life, or to reach out and touch them and bring them into your reality, then maybe ask other people, like, what resources you, and can you share that with me?
Mm-hmm.
Really just giving yourself the space to withdraw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did a little reading before this. That was the first card Lisasia
Yeah.
pulled from our Threads of Fate deck, which is beautiful, by the way.
To take some space from all of the noise, and give yourself some of the safety necessary to unravel a little bit, and know that grief is going to tear you open. Um, n- Nobody gets out of that experience without being cracked open a little bit.
Yeah.
And that you're gonna survive it.
Mhm.
You're gonna be changed a little bit. It's going to change you. And there's a lot of chaos in it. But you deserve the safety and the space to be able to unravel a little bit.
Those words are like honey. Really, really, the safety and the space to unravel, to come undone, to break open. I mean, truly, each and every one of us deserves that, and particularly in these moments that just feel so unbearable sometimes. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing as a funeral celebrant and a grief advocate, and just a friend and a trustable sister to walk through the darkness with. I really respect the calling that you're saying yes to in this lifetime, and the greater why that is pulling you through, all doubt, all thought, all feeling towards this thing that is just lighting you on fire, with knowing that this is how you're meant to serve in the world. And it's beautiful to witness your process. So at this point, I would just love to share with everyone who's tuning in, how can people best find you and connect with you if they're curious about the work that you're doing, or would like to do some work with you moving forward?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you so much for seeing me. The universe rewards the brave. If you'd like to connect with me, you can come shoot me a message at therevolvingaltar.com. Take a look at the blogs that I have posted there. Otherwise, you can also find me at The Revolving Altar on Instagram.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you so much for saying yes to this sacred conversation today, Lisasia. So many beautiful things came through, and I just feel completely honored and thrilled to know you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.